In the silent darkness of the swampy road, where the thick fog seemed to whisper ancient secrets, a lone truck driver named Ethan drove on his last nightly delivery. Ethan, a man in his 40s, was known for his determination and courage, someone who was unimpressed by haunt stories told by local drivers. He always believed that the swampy road, known as Hollow Swamp Road, was just another isolated stretch like so many others, with its treacherous curves and desolate landscapes. As he drove along that little-traveled road, his truck's radio screeched with interference, interrupting the melody that helped him stay awake. He tried to adjust the dial, but the noise grew louder, irritating and persistent. From the outside, the road looked like an endless tunnel, flanked by crooked trees emerging from the shadows. The night mist created shapes that seemed to dance in the air, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Suddenly, Ethan braked sharply. In the middle of the road, something was staggering. It wasn't human, but it didn't look like an animal he recognized either. The creature was tall, thin, with a strange posture, almost broken. His movements were uncoordinated, as if he was struggling to maintain his balance. A feeling of unease crept up Ethan's spine as he tried to focus on what he saw. "What the hell is that?" he murmured, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The creature stopped, turning what appeared to be its head toward the truck. His eyes, or what appeared to be eyes, were two opaque red lights that pulsed gently, like a lamp in the wind. The silhouette leaned forward slightly, emitting a guttural sound, something between a muffled roar and a desperate scream. And before we continue with this intriguing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps us bring more content like this to you. Now let's get back to the story. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who ran away easily, but a sense of urgency came over him. Stepping on the accelerator, he swerved around the obstacle, looking in the rearview mirror as the figure disappeared into the fog. Despite moving forward, his heart seemed to pound in his chest. He knew he should stop, report, or at least try to understand what he had just witnessed, but the visceral feeling that he shouldn't return was too strong. Hours later, at the only roadside restaurant in the region, Ethan shared his experience with other drivers. Some laughed, calling him just another one who saw the monster from the swampy road. Others, more serious, exchanged nervous glances. "You saw the red eyes, didn't you?" said one of them, an old man called Bill, a veteran in the profession. "Yes. How do you know?" "Everyone who passes that road and sees him reports the same thing. But that's not all. Some people don't come back to tell us." The murmurs increased and the atmosphere became heavy. Ethan tried to divert the topic, but Bill's story left him intrigued. He decided to investigate further about what was hidden on that road. Something said that this apparition was not just a figment of his imagination. Ethan spent the next few days trying to shake off thoughts of what he had seen on Hollow Swamp Road. He tried to convince himself that it was just a vision distorted by exhaustion, perhaps a wounded animal or a strange reflection in the fog. But deep down, something didn't feel right. The way that creature moved, the pulsing red eyes and the guttural sound kept coming back in flashes every time I closed my eyes. He determined he needed answers. He returned to the roadside restaurant, where he had heard the story of Bill, the veteran driver. Bill was there, sitting at his usual table, with a strong coffee in hand. Ethan approached. "I need to know more about what's on that road, Bill. What do you know?" Bill looked up slowly, his tired face reflecting years of heavy stories and secrets. He looked around, making sure no one was paying attention, and motioned for Ethan to sit down. "You shouldn't get involved in this, boy. Some things are better left as they are." Bill's voice was deep, almost a whisper. "I'm not the type to let something like that go. What is that thing?" Bill sighed, like someone who had been carrying a weight for a long time. "The road crosses a part of the swamp that the former residents avoided at all costs. They say the land was cursed by an indigenous tribe that lived there centuries ago. They defended the place as a sanctuary, a portal between this world and another. When settlers began exploring the swamp, the tribe disappeared, but something was left behind. Something that protects that place. Ethan frowned. He wasn't a man who believed in legends and curses, but something about the way Bill spoke made him uneasy. And what exactly is this protector? Nobody knows for sure. Some say it is an ancestral spirit. Others think it is a creature that feeds on the energy of those who pass by. Bill paused, observing Ethan's expression. But one thing is certain. Whoever sees it carries a piece of that road with them, and not everyone can handle it. Ethan laughed, trying to hide his discomfort. So you're saying I brought something with me? I'm saying if you want answers, you're going to have to go back there, but be warned. You may not like what you find. That same night, unable to ignore Bill's warning, Ethan took his truck and headed back to Hollow Swamp Road. He drove slowly, headlights illuminating the deserted road. The fog seemed thicker, almost as if it were alive, enveloping the vehicle in a suffocating embrace. He stopped the truck near a curve where he had first seen the creature. He turned off the engine and got out, feeling the weight of the silence around him. The swamp was a sea of shadows, with misshapen trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Ethan walked a few steps, the flashlight in his hands shaking slightly. Suddenly, a low sound, like a distorted whisper, echoed through the air. He quickly turned around, but saw nothing. As he started to walk back to the truck, he heard it again, this time closer. Ethan! The voice seemed to claw at his mind. He swung the flashlight around frantically, illuminating the bushes and fog. Then he saw her again. The creature was there, closer than before, its red eyes glowing like embers. "What do you want?" Ethan shouted, more in despair than courage. The creature moved forward, disjointedly, emitting that same guttural sound, now louder and more intense. Ethan took a step back but tripped and fell, the lantern falling to the floor and rolling. In the dark, he heard wet, heavy footsteps approaching. When the flashlight's light finally pointed at the creature, he saw something that made him freeze. Amid the deformed skin and glowing eyes, Ethan noticed human features, a partially recognizable face. "My God," he murmured. Before he could react, the creature retreated into the shadows, disappearing into the mist. Still shaking, Ethan ran back to the truck and drove away. He knew he needed to understand what was happening, but now he had more questions than answers. That creature was something beyond her understanding, but one thing was clear. She knew its name. The days following the new encounter with the creature were dark for Ethan. He barely slept, and when he did, his dreams were plagued by red eyes that watched him in the darkness. He tried to ignore what happened, but the memory of the human face on the creature tormented him. It was as if she carried a secret that he needed to uncover. Desperate for answers, Ethan sought out an old library in the small town next to the swampy road. There, he found historical records of Hollow Swamp dating back to the early 1800s, dusty and yellowed with age. The documents told of missing settlers, reports of mysterious lights in the swamp, and unexplained deaths. One name caught his attention: Nathaniel Carter, a local farmer who had led an attempt to drain the swamp to expand his land. According to records, Nathaniel and his group disappeared without a trace after a series of strange events. But most disturbing was a drawing on one of the manuscripts. He depicted a tall, staggering figure with glowing eyes. "Gate Protector" was scrawled in shaky handwriting next to the illustration. Ethan felt a shiver run up his spine. Could that protector be the creature he saw? And if so, why did he seem to have something human about his appearance? Determining that the answer could only lie on Hollow Swamp Road itself, Ethan decided to return to the site one last time. This time, he took with him a camera, a more powerful flashlight, and an old revolver that he had inherited from his father. He reached the road at midnight, when it was absolutely silent. He parked the truck near the same spot where he had found the creature before and began to explore the surroundings. The swamp seemed different, more alive, as if the environment itself was watching it. The gnarled trees seemed to move slightly in a breeze he couldn't feel. Walking through thick mud, Ethan found something unexpected, an abandoned cabin, almost swallowed by vegetation. The structure was precarious, made of rotten wood and covered in moss. On the door, marks that looked like claws were deeply engraved, as if something had tried to get in or out. Ethan pushed the door open carefully, feeling the stale air and musty smell. Inside, he found broken furniture, remains of candles, and in the center, a rudimentary altar. On the altar there were symbols he couldn't recognize, carved into the wood, and an old diary. Upon opening the diary, Ethan discovered that it belonged to Nathaniel Carter. The last few pages described increasingly disturbing events. Something has awakened in the swamp. We have angered it. It is not just a spirit. It is something older, hungrier. It feeds on those who dare defy it. The last page contained only a warning, written so forcefully that the paper was torn. Don't look into the eyes. Ethan felt a pang of fear, but before he could process what he was reading, a loud, bassy sound echoed outside the cabin. He turned off the flashlight and hid behind a piece of furniture. Through a small opening in the wall, he saw the creature again. It was closer, clearer. The red eyes lit up the surroundings like flashlights, and this time she seemed to be looking for something. "Ethan," the guttural voice called, echoing like a lament. He felt his heart race. The creature knew where he was. Slowly, Ethan pointed the camera toward the window and began recording. When he looked through the viewfinder, he saw something that made him almost drop the device. The human face he had seen before was now more defined. It was Nathaniel Carter's face, but distorted, as if it had been shaped in agony. Without warning, the creature turned sharply toward the cabin, its red eyes shining directly in Ethan's direction. He felt a sharp pain in his head, as if something was invading his mind. It was more than fear. It was as if the creature was trying to enter his consciousness. With a superhuman effort, Ethan broke eye contact and bolted out of the cabin. The creature let out a scream that seemed to tear the air, and he ran as fast as he could, hearing heavy footsteps behind him. Arriving at the truck, Ethan started the engine and sped down the road, but the creature continued to follow him, its red eyes visible in the rearview mirror. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. Then he remembered the warning in the diary. Don't look into the eyes. Slamming the brakes, Ethan stopped the truck abruptly and got out, turning to face the creature. But this time, he kept his eyes focused on her distorted body, without looking directly into the glowing eyes. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. The creature stopped, as if assessing its courage. And then, in a terrifying moment, he spoke clearly. "Liberation." Before he could respond, the creature began to disintegrate into a cloud of mist, leaving behind only silence and a trail of mud on the road. Ethan stood there, panting, realizing he was at the center of something much bigger than he imagined. Ethan came home that night completely exhausted, but there was no rest for his mind. The creature's words echoed in his thoughts. Liberation. He knew he couldn't ignore what he had experienced. There was something in the swamp, something old, stuck, that demanded a solution. After a few hours of restless sleep, Ethan began to investigate further. He returned to the library, this time to consult books on indigenous folklore and legends of the region. He found vague references to Hollow Swamp as a place considered sacred by tribes who had lived there for centuries. The texts mentioned a guardian who protects a spiritual portal, and that his imprisonment had caused imbalances in both the natural and spiritual worlds. Among the documents, Ethan found the name of a woman named Rachel Porter, an anthropologist specializing in indigenous cultures, who worked at a museum in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Wasting no time, Ethan drove over and asked to speak to her. Rachel was a woman in her 50s, with gray hair tied into a bun and eyes that conveyed an unceasing curiosity. When Ethan explained what he had seen and showed recordings of the creature, Rachel didn't seem as skeptical as he had expected. "What you found, sir, is something many have spent years trying to prove. This creature is the guardian of a spiritual portal. He was trapped between the worlds because the balance was broken when the colonists drained the swamp and invaded the sacred territory. Ethan frowned, trying to understand the connection. Why did he appear to me? He knew my name. Rachel hesitated before answering. Maybe because you crossed a line that few dare. The Guardian's presence is a warning. He is asking you to right the wrong that humans made so long ago. Ethan felt the weight of those words. And how would I do that? Rachel opened an old map of the region, pointing to an area marked as the heart of the swamp. They say there is a central altar, the point where the portal was sealed. It is there that balance can be restored. And what do I need to do? Asked Ethan. Rachel looked at him seriously. You will have to perform a liberation ritual. But know that opening the portal means facing the unknown. We don't know what else could be inside. With detailed instructions from Rachel and a protective amulet she gave him, Ethan prepared for the journey to the heart of the swamp. He knew that the place was inaccessible by car, so he would need to travel on foot through treacherous terrain, carrying the few supplies he could carry. The walk through the swamp was oppressive. The mud sucked at his boots, the air was thick, and the sounds of insects and something larger, always out of sight, accompanied him. With every step, he felt as if his surroundings were alive, watching him. When he finally arrived at the altar, Ethan was surprised by his grandeur. Made of black stone covered in moss, the altar seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. He positioned the ritual objects as Rachel instructed: candles, salt, herbs, and the protective amulet. As soon as he began chanting the words of the ritual, something changed around him. The mist became thicker, swirling around the altar like a whirlwind. Guttural sounds echoed, and the Guardian's figure emerged from the shadows. "Liberation," said the creature again, his voice full of urgency. Ethan continued the ritual even as the earth beneath his feet began to shake. He could feel the Guardian approaching, its overwhelming presence enveloping him. Suddenly, a burst of light emanated from the altar, illuminating the entire swamp. Ethan was thrown back, but managed to see the Guardian being enveloped in light. The creature let out a scream that sounded like a mixture of relief and pain before disappearing completely. The light dissipated, and everything became silent. Ethan lay there for a few moments, trying to understand what had happened. The Guardian was gone, but where to? On the way back to the road, Ethan noticed that the swamp looked different. The fog was disappearing, the sounds were less threatening, and the environment seemed calmer. When he finally reached his truck, he realized that something inside him had changed. He felt lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. However, there were still unanswered questions. The Guardian had been freed, but what did that mean for the portal he protected? And why had Ethan been chosen to carry out this task? He knew his journey was not over yet. Something told him that that experience was just the beginning of something much bigger. The days following the ritual in the swamp were a mixture of calm and restlessness for Ethan. On the one hand, the swampy road, once shrouded in fog and secrets, seemed more peaceful, but on the other hand, he felt that something had changed within himself. The world seemed different, as if he saw beyond what was visible. This feeling reached its peak when, one silent night, Ethan had a dream that seemed too real to be just a figment of his imagination. He was in the swamp again, but this time the environment was surreal. The trees glowed with an ethereal blue light, and the air was charged with pulsing energy. In the center, the Guardian was standing, but not as before. His appearance was less monstrous, more human, yet still carried the imposing aura of something beyond this world. "You opened the portal, but the journey is not over yet." The Guardian's voice echoed directly in Ethan's mind. "Balance has been restored, but the path between the worlds remains unstable. Something woke up." Ethan woke with a start, the final phrase echoing in his head. Something has awakened. He knew he needed to go back to the swamp, to the altar, to understand what was happening. Equipped with new determination, Ethan drove to Hollow Swamp Road. This time, He took with him a backpack with supplies, the protective amulet given to him by Rachel, and a camera to document anything he found. When he arrived at the place, he noticed that the road was deserted. The silence was absolute. The walk to the altar was shorter than he expected, as if the swamp was making it easier for him to pass. Upon arriving at the location, Ethan found the altar completely different. The black stones glowed with an internal light, as if they were alive, and marks that weren't there before covered the surface. As he approached, the ground began to tremble slightly, and a thin crack appeared in the center of the altar. From within, intense light leaked out, pulsing like a heart. Ethan instinctively took a step back, but the energy enveloped him. Suddenly, he was sucked into a vision. Ethan was in a place he didn't recognize. The sky was a deep red, and shadowy shapes moved in the distance, impossible to make out. In the center, a gigantic structure that looked like a portal, formed by floating stones that rotated slowly. He knew that this was the real portal, and that something was trying to break through. A voice brought him back to reality. Rachel. "Ethan!" she called, her voice cutting through the heavy air. He turned around and saw Rachel running towards him. "How did you find me?" he asked, confused. "When you didn't come back, I went to the swamp, and the portal. It's active, isn't it?" Rachel looked scared, but also fascinated. Ethan nodded. "There's something trying to get through. I saw things. I don't know what they are, but it doesn't look good." Rachel approached the altar, examining the cracks. "This is worse than I thought. The portal was sealed centuries ago, but opening it again caused a rupture. Now the barriers between the worlds are weaker. If something comes out..." Before he could finish, a low, guttural sound filled the air. The surrounding trees began to bend, as if something invisible was pressing down on them. The crack in the altar expanded, and a figure slowly emerged. It was tall, even bigger than the Guardian, with a shape that seemed to constantly change, mixing shadows and light. His eyes glowed a cold blue, completely different from the Guardian's red eyes. "It can't be," Rachel murmured, instinctively stepping back. The creature looked at Ethan and Rachel, its presence overwhelming. When he spoke, his voice was deep, reverberating in the air. "You freed me, and now you will pay the price." Ethan held the protective amulet tightly, feeling the creature's energy invade his mind. He knew he didn't have the strength to face her directly. "Rachel, what can we do?" he shouted, trying to maintain control. She looked around desperately. "The Guardian was the balance. But if the portal is open, maybe we can seal it again. I need you to distract him while I prepare the ritual." Ethan swallowed hard, but nodded. "Right. Do it quickly." As Rachel put together the ritual, Ethan approached the creature, feeling the crushing weight of its presence. "Hey, big guy!" he shouted, trying to get her attention. "You won't get through here so easily." The creature turned towards him, letting out a deafening scream. Ethan ran, dodging the falling trees around him as the creature chased him. His goal was not to fight, but to buy Rachel time. "It's almost ready," she shouted. Ethan made a sharp turn, heading back toward the altar. Rachel was standing in the center, her hands raised and the amulet glowing in her hands. "Now, Ethan, bring him here." With desperate courage, Ethan ran towards the altar, the creature close behind. When they reached the center, Rachel chanted the final words of the ritual. An explosion of light took over the swamp, enveloping everyone. Ethan felt his body being thrown backwards, and everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, the swamp was calm again. The altar was gone, and Rachel was beside it, panting. "Did we make it?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "The portal is closed, for now." But they both knew that something had changed forever. The swamp might seem peaceful, but Ethan felt like the barriers between the worlds would never be the same again. Ethan and Rachel walked through the swamp in silence, the weight of what they had just done weighing on them. The altar was gone, and the swamp was incredibly quiet, almost as if it had been asleep after years of unrest. Still, Ethan felt no relief. He knew that the closing of the portal was not an ending, but a postponement. Back on the road, Ethan helped Rachel into her car. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, worried about the tiredness evident on her face. "Yes, but all of this was more than I expected." Rachel took a deep breath, looking at the horizon. "The swamp is safe for now, but if the stories are true, this portal should never have been opened." Ethan leaned against the truck, crossing his arms. "What if something tries to open again?" Rachel hesitated before answering. "I am not sure, but what we saw, the creature that came out, it is proof that the other side is not an empty place. There are things there, things that shouldn't cross into our world." Ethan nodded, the fear of another rupture growing in his chest. "If that happens, Rachel, I'll be ready." Rachel looked at him, surprised by the determination in his voice. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll be there too, Ethan. This is our burden now." In the days that followed, Ethan tried to get back to his routine, but everything felt different. The swamp felt less oppressive, but he knew he shouldn't let his guard down. He decided that he would keep a diary, recording everything he saw and learned in case something happened in the future. Rumors about the swampy road began to disappear. Drivers who avoided Hollow Swamp Road now traveled along it without incident. Even the most superstitious began to believe that the road monster was just a legend. But Ethan knew the truth. One night, weeks after the event, Ethan was at home when he heard a sound outside. 3 soft knocks on the door. His heart raced. He picked up the revolver and walked slowly to the entrance. When I opened the door, there was no one there. Just the sound of the wind and the darkness of the night. When he turned to go in, he saw something on the floor, the amulet Rachel had given him, now cracked in the center. A note was attached to it, written in irregular letters. "The Guardian cannot protect forever." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. Back at the swamp, Hollow Swamp Road was darker than usual, and the mist was beginning to reappear, slow and silent, a warning that balance is never permanent. Ethan knew his life would never be the same. He had been chosen for something that was beyond his understanding, and now the responsibility of guarding this place was his. As he looked at the cracked amulet in his hands, one thing was clear. The portal might be closed, but what was on the other side was still watching him. A few months after the events in the swamp, Ethan was trying to return to a normal life, but normality seemed a distant idea. He continued to drive, but his trips never came close to Hollow Swamp Road. Although traffic had returned to that road, he knew that the place held a secret that most people would never understand. One night, while at a bar in town, Ethan ran into Bill, the veteran driver who had been the first to tell him about the mysteries of the road. Bill looked up from his beer when he saw him. "Haven't seen you around here in a while, kid." "All good?" Bill asked, his tone casual but with a hint of curiosity. Ethan hesitated for a moment before responding. "I think so. Things have changed a little." Bill narrowed his eyes, examining him as if he could sense something was different. "You saw more than you should have on that road, didn't you?" Ethan just nodded without saying anything else. Bill leaned in, lowering his voice. "Listen, kid, I've been driving these roads for 40 years. There are things in this world that are not meant to be understood. You were lucky to get out of there in one piece. Don't mess around again." Ethan knew Bill was right, but he also knew that the decision to walk away was not his to make. That night, Ethan received a call from Rachel. "Ethan, we need to talk." His voice was urgent. He drove to Baton Rouge, where Rachel welcomed him into her home. In the center of the room was a map of the region, covered in notes and markers. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. "What happened?" asked Ethan. Rachel pointed to a spot on the map, away from the swamp. "I received a report from a local researcher. He found symbols similar to those on the altar on the opposite side of the region. This could mean that the portal is not the only one." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "More portals? How is this possible?" Rachel sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know. But if there are others, it means that the barriers between the worlds are weaker than we thought." Ethan looked at the cracked amulet in his pocket, feeling the weight of responsibility. "And what can we do?" Rachel looked at him, her expression serious. "We need to close them all, and fast." Weeks later, Ethan and Rachel began investigating the locations of possible portals. They traveled to remote places, following clues and stories from local residents. Each location had its own dark energy, and each ritual was more exhausting than the last. Over time, Ethan began to feel the effects of travel and encounters with the unknown. The nightmares became a constant, and he woke up feeling like he was being watched. Rachel didn't escape unscathed either. His health began to decline, and mental exhaustion was visible in his eyes. But they continued, driven by a silent determination. On one of their last journeys, they found a portal in an isolated canyon. Unlike the swamp, this one seemed more active, with lights flashing and the sound of ghostly winds coming from within. As they performed the ritual to seal him, the energy around him intensified. Ethan felt a force trying to stop him, as if something on the other side was fighting to keep the portal open. Rachel screamed for him to continue, even as the earth began to shake violently. With one last effort, the portal was sealed, but not without consequences. Rachel fell to the floor, exhausted, and Ethan held her in his arms. "It's done," she whispered, before fainting. Months later, Ethan was sitting on the porch of his small house, looking at the sunset. He had stopped driving, opting for a quieter life, but the weight of what he had experienced was still with him. However, something inside him had changed. He was no longer just an ordinary man. He was a keeper of secrets that few could understand, a bridge between worlds that should never cross. Rachel, now recovered, had moved nearby. They were in frequent contact, sharing information and monitoring for possible signs of supernatural activity. That night, as Ethan looked up at the starry sky, he felt a cold breeze pass by. He looked towards the horizon, and for a brief moment he saw something shining in the distance. It was not a star, but a light that seemed to pulse. He knew the fight would never really end, but it was ready for what he came. With a deep sigh, Ethan smiled, accepting his role in the great mystery that was the balance between the worlds. What did you think of this outcome? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like to support our work. We see each other in the next video.